The girl stood at the iron door with a lion head knocker and a stomach that spoke before she could. Dust ribboned off her sandals. The afternoon light made a bronze seam along the threshold where public street met private stone. She raised her fist as if to test the metal's honesty and knocked only once. Somewhere deep inside the compound, a radio hushed, a page turned, and a guard's boots found the path. This was the People's House, the plain residence where Ibrahim kept his desk without glass on it, a place known for open Fridays and difficult Mondays. The door had seen petitions scratched on envelopes and blessings whispered at dawn, but hunger has a sound that cuts through ceremony. When the latch lifted, that sound, thin and unpretending, entered like a small wind. Her name was Mariama, 12 by recounting harvests, older by the way she looked at plates. She carried no letter of introduction and no adult buffer, only a tin spoon tied to her wrist with blue thread. The guard on duty, Isa, had the kind of face that holds a map of the city, and his training told him to divert, to reroute toward ministries that stamped things. The policy on the clipboard said assistance required a referral from Ward Social Services and a copy of Form 27B. The policy did not speak of spoons. Isa asked the practiced questions. Mariama's answers were the simple nouns of hunger: rice, mother gone, roof broken, sleep loud. He felt the breath of a system at his back, an old ledger that added only what was already there, never what was missing. He could already see the obstacle taking shape like a name over a doorway. Across town, the social welfare gatekeeper, Madame Nadala, had spent years learning how to turn need into neat stacks. Her window was a slit where paper entered, came out with a stamp, and sometimes did not come out at all. The budget for emergency meals passed through her ledgers. A modest per diem for each referral ticked in the margin beside her initials. She denied nothing outright. She only asked for one more form, one more proof of kinship, one more photocopy that cost an afternoon and 200 francs. In the alley outside, brokers in faded vests offered to accelerate for a fee. This was the gate that converted the breath of a child into the sigh of bureaucracy. Isa knew that if he sent the girl there, the door would thicken around her. At his wooden desk, Ibrahim read reports no different in weight than rocks. Prices had climbed, rains had sulked, agencies had learned to speak in numbers that hid faces. His advisors argued in the precise language of feasibility, but he kept a small notebook with human tallies. Names heard at markets, a teacher who spent her salary on chalk, a mother who sold her mattress for medicine. He believed in ledgers you could read aloud without shame. When Isa radioed the inner office that an unaccompanied minor sought food without papers, protocol suggested a polite redirection. The house rule, defer to ministries, was there to keep the executive out of the weeds. But sometimes the weeds were where the road should have been. In the kitchen annex, Aminata, the canteen cook, heard the rumor of the knock and ladled stew into a tin by muscle memory. She had fed soldiers with lost eyes and aides with found appetites. She knew the smell of policy when it curdled. She folded a piece of bread, tucked in a miracle of pepper, and paused. The last time she stretched a rule, the audit men wrote her up for unauthorized disbursement. The paper was still in her apron pocket, a stiff leaf with numbers marching down. She leaned on the counter and listened for the house's decision traveling through hallways like a weather change. Isa kept the door half open. He had been a teacher before the uniform, and his body remembered how to square himself between harm and a child. He told Mariama to wait and offered her water. She looked at the lion head knocker, and the lion looked back, its brass mouth forever biting a ring. The door motif of this city, the difference between being inside and being out, stood there, weighted by history and screws. A decision was coming, and it would hang on that hinge. The house breathed. Papers rattled. Somewhere, a rule was about to meet a face. The afternoon bent toward evening, and with it, a chance for the ledger to learn a new number. Isa's radio crackled in a pattern he knew too well. Hold position, gather particulars, await instruction. He asked Mariama for anyone he could call. She recited names like a list of vanished streets. Mother, dead during the malaria season that came early. Father, gone south to chase a rumor of work. Last message, a voice note 3 months old, ending in a cough and a promise. Aunt, somewhere beyond the river with a baby who would not stop. There were neighbors whose doors had their own pressures. Isa wrote what he could in a neat block hand while the radio spoke in the shorthand of distance. The iron door remained a line that could become either a shelter or a refusal depending on which way the latch swung. Inside, a junior aide named Fatou, the one people misjudged because she wore laughter like a scarf, found herself listening harder than usual. She handled the correspondence that began with pain and often ended with silence. She knew the biographies of policy, how a clause was born to address a scandal, how budgets grew armor, how urgency evaporated into consultations. She also knew the city's hunger map by smell. She stepped into the secretary's office and asked an impertinent question. If the People's House could host 100 dignitaries with plated fish, could it not provide a child one bowl without a stamp? The secretary did not answer quickly. The silence had weight. It suggested that the question was not logistical, but theological. Across town, the brokerage around Madame Ndala's window thickened like traffic before a checkpoint. A man with a creased suit gathered a small circle of applicants, explaining in a patient voice that Form 27B required Form 27A and a guardianship letter witnessed by the war chief. He waved a stack of blank templates like magic tricks. The price he named was a third of a week's wages. A woman protested that hunger was not a document, and he smiled with practiced sadness. The ledger behind the glass kept counting. Each delay converted calories into fees. Each referral took days. The meal line closed at 4. By the time word of the knock reached Ibrahim, the sun had pulled a red wool over the city. He paused, pen held in the soft vise between fingers, and saw the scale. On one side, order, the respect of institutions, the narrow lane that keeps a leader from becoming a one-man ministry. On the other, a child and a spoon. He remembered an old proverb his grandfather kept in a pocket next to tobacco. A door is not a wall that forgot. He called for Fatu. He asked precise questions. What does the rule say? Who wrote it? What happens tonight if we follow it? The answers were clean and painful. If they obeyed the chain, Mariama would sleep hungry within sight of a kitchen. The radio to Isa barked again. Escort the miner to social welfare in the morning when the registry opens. Provide temporary shelter at the outer guard room. Issue no food from state stores without referral. It was a smart instruction on paper. It avoided favoritism, protected the house from claims of selective charity, and reinforced the role of ministries. Asa looked at Mariama's hands. He folded the order into the front of his shirt without comment. Aminata stood in the hallway with a tin, undecided, the steam searching for a place to be lawful. At the last moment before the compound would choose its usual caution, a second knock sounded. It was not on the Lionhead, but on the inner office door. Fatu entered without ceremony and spoke over the drone of air conditioning. We are building a gate where there is a breath, she said, and the ledger will not be poorer if a child eats. Ibrahim studied the edge of his desk as if it could teach him. He nodded once. Tell Isa the door opens. The instruction traveled with the speed of hunger's relief, cutting through corridors that had learned to slow everything down. Isa's shoulders eased. Aminata crossed the floor. The tin found the girl's hands. The first spoonful's clatter against enamel was a bell, but the decision to feed would not quiet the city's long hunger. It would ring other doors awake. The night gathered with a new tension, the kind that asks what tomorrow will demand because of what we chose tonight. The morning broke with the pale gold of harm postponed and harm returning. News of a child fed at the People's House did what stories do in cities built on whispers. It traveled faster than policy can walk. Some told it as proof that the leader remembered what bread smells like, others as a sign of favoritism, an exception carved into the door. At the canteen, Aminata washed the tin with careful circles, as if absolution could be polished into metal. Isa drafted an incident report that did not apologize. He wrote that a human presented with urgent need and relief was provided. He did not add that he stood taller afterward. Ibrahim called a small meeting that did not fit the usual mold. No podium, no microphones, no photographs. In the room were Fatu, the secretary, the Treasury liaison who believed numbers could be taught to behave, and a representative from social welfare who arrived with a briefcase full of cautions. Ibrahim began by describing the door as an instrument. The state, he said softly, is a house. A house has doors. Doors are meant to open to the right people at the right time for the right reasons. We have reversed the order of help. We ask for a ledger to recognize a person. We bill before we breathe. He proposed an intervention as small as a hinge and as large as a habit. A rule called first meal, first hour. The rule's bone was simple. Any miner who presented at a state facility hungry would be fed within 60 minutes, with no precondition of paperwork. Payment, verification, and reporting would follow after the stomach had been quieted. The Treasury liaison frowned and then relaxed as Ibrahim sketched a funding channel. A modest emergency line item increased by shaving from ceremonial hospitality, audited weekly against kitchen records. Sick systems hide behind complexity. Healthy ones show their receipts. The social welfare representative objected that bad actors would flood the gates with false claims. Fatu answered without heat. The hunger market already exists outside your window. and it is taxed by brokers you do not acknowledge. She placed on the table a photocopy of a facilitation fee receipt, issued by a private agent in the shadow of Madame Ndala's window. The number on it was small and obscene. Ibrahim dictated the essence of the first meal protocol into Fatu's notebook with the care of a man writing a recipe he expects his grandchildren to cook. Treat first, bill later. Keep the door light for the empty-handed. Record the time from knock to plate. Share the numbers where the public can read them. He asked Aminata to join because the reform would succeed or fail in hands like hers, not in hands like his. She suggested a drill so simple it would embarrass everyone. At the start of every shift, one staffer plays the hungry child, one the guard, one the cook. They time themselves with the phone and write the minutes on a chalkboard. Better to look foolish at 10 in the morning than cruel at 2 in the afternoon. The secretary worried about precedent. If you open this door, he said, others will find it. Good, Ibrahim replied. If we cannot endure the poor, what are we building? He kept his voice at river level. No thunder, no tumbling adjectives. A door is only a gate if someone holds it shut. He signed the directive with a pen that had been used to approve less courageous things. In the same hour, Fatu drafted a message for the state's telegram channel. It was plain language in 3 lines. If you are a miner and hungry, come to any state kitchen. You will be fed within an hour. Bring your name if you have one. Bring your breath if you don't. Issa taped the paper copy of the directive to the inside of the guardroom window, next to duty rosters and fire drill instructions. He underlined the phrase, no precondition. Aminata trained her team with laughter and seriousness braided together. The first practice run took 9 minutes to fumble a bowl and recover grace. The second took 6. By noon, the chalkboard showed 5 measures of time, each shorter than the last. In the ward office, Madame Ndala heard the rumor before she read the directive. She felt a tremor in her ledger's authority. She wrapped her fingers around her stamp as if it were a lifeline and thought about the brokers outside who provided services her window had made necessary. The door she guarded had just lost a lock. She would not yield without the theater of objections. Reforms without exposure grow thin. The old metabolism returns the moment vigilance blinks. Fatu requested an audit with teeth and asked that its first day be the day of the knock. The inspectorate's men arrived expecting a courtesy review. They met instead at table, where Aminata had laid out annotated kitchen logs, a ledger that smelled of pepper and salt. Each ladle served had been recorded with a time, an initial, and a short note. Boy from bus depot, girl in blue thread, twins with a quiet aunt. On a separate sheet, Issa had kept a door journal, timestamps of arrivals and waits. Fatu placed these beside photocopies of social welfare's referral lists and Madame Ndala's disbursement schedules. The gaps were not accounting errors. They were canyons. It was not a grand scandal with suitcases of cash and Swiss accounts. It was petty gravity, a perverse incentive baked into the policy. Soup could only be reimbursed if a form existed. Forms took days. Hunger could not wait. People paid brokers so that waiting would hurt less. Madame Ndala did not steal. She simply built a tall gate and controlled the pace of opening. The audit team visited her window and found neat stacks and stern glances. They asked to see the denial book, the record of who had been turned away and why. There was no such book. Denials had evaporated into air. They requested the receipt book of outside facilitators. She explained with a careful shrug that outside actors were none of her concern. In the alley, the man with the creased suit refused to speak until he realized the camera's red light was not bluff. He described a system of expediting that paid for itself and saved time. The audit went past the ministry into kitchens and markets, clinics and mosques. Community voices filled the margins of the report. Auntie Salma from the river market testified in a voice that reminded the room of how truth sounds when it does not know it is testifying. She described a morning when she had taken a neighbor's child to the welfare window and watched the day disappear. She held up her own ledger, a stall notebook with prices and debts, and showed how hunger grows interest. Imam Bako admitted from the pulpit that the mosque had quietly fed children in the afternoons because the city's formal relief could not pierce its own paperwork. He praised the first meal protocol with the kind of blessing that doubles as a warning. Do not promise and then fail. Fatu compiled WhatsApp voice notes from frontline workers across the wards. A nurse spoke of infants whose mothers had been told to return with guardians while their milk dried up. A school matron described students who fainted during assemblies because the stipend tied to attendance arrived 3 weeks late. Each voice contained a clause the policy had refused to hear until now. The report named the mechanism plainly, sequence inversion. We have placed verification before relief, the way a customs officer checks a passport before allowing someone to breathe. The document included artifacts that could not be waved away. Screenshots of the telegram announcement with thousands of shares, photos of the chalkboards with door-to-meal minutes, a printout of Aminata's training drill poster, the one with stick figures and arrows, and a schedule pinned to it in 3 kitchens. When the draft report crossed Ibrahim's desk, it did not victimize and it did not gloat. It was an anatomy lesson. It showed where the artery had been pinched. It recommended the ban of brokerage by rendering it unnecessary, not by pretending it would vanish. It proposed a public dashboard mounted on the outer wall of every state kitchen and welfare office, with 3 lines that even a child could read. Door-to-meal minutes. Denials past 24 hours. Complaints resolved. It laid out a complaint channel that did not route back to the gatekeeper, a short code number for SMS, a WhatsApp line monitored by the inspectorate with a 24-hour service level agreement, and a weekly published tally. It suggested a sanction ladder for officials who built private gates inside public doors, retraining, suspension, dismissal, prosecution where law permitted. It named no villains beyond the design that had invited them. The day the report was released, Madame Nadala stood behind her window and felt the temperature shift. On the dashboard erected beside her, the denials line began at a number too high to defend, and then, under the hot gaze of public curiosity, declined. Outside, the brokers wilted. Some vanished. Some asked for jobs on the right side of the glass. The audit had not only exposed, it had rearranged the oxygen in the room. The city hummed, as if it had just learned it could count in a new direction. People began to try the doors again, testing the hinges for truth. The report's final page called for a monthly culture check, an ordinary ritual where staff would read aloud the first meal rule and their own minutes on the board, not as performance, but as maintenance. Ibrahim marked that line in the margin with a star. Exposure must become habit. The next phase was ready to open. Systems turn slowly, unless someone reduces the task to a movement so boring it cannot be skipped. Ibrahim signed the first meal protocol into law with a paragraph that fit on a palm. He asked the printers to make posters in large black letters that school children could copy on slates. He redirected funds from banquets and protocol refreshments, a line item both vague and rich, into a transparent meal wallet tethered to each ward kitchen's mobile account. The Treasury liaison designed a small dashboard that flipped between 3 numbers large enough to be read from the street. The rule's teeth were modest and real. No kitchen could close its shutters if the door-to-meal line exceeded 60 minutes without an incident note. Any official who required a document before serving would face a warning, a suspension, and, upon 3rd offense, termination. None of this felt like thunder. It felt like a latch being oiled. Aminata became the unofficial dean of the drill. She visited ward kitchens with a plastic bowl and a stopwatch. She would hand someone the bowl and say, "You are hunger. Knock." Then she would stand by the chalkboard and count the seconds, calling out names with affection and urgency. Guards learned to keep a tray of bread near the door, not inside on a shelf that made people cross a second gate. Clerks learned that a name can be taken while a hand holds a spoon. The knock open serve record sequence took 30 seconds to explain and a week to become muscle memory. The first monthly culture checks felt theatrical and a little silly. By the 3rd, they had the quiet of washing hands. Asa updated his door journal to include refusals, a category that now felt like a confession. The first week's numbers stumbled, the second steadied, the 3rd improved in tiny increments that tasted like victory. The public dashboard drew its own audience. Children compared minutes like game scores. Shopkeepers teased kitchens that lagged. A radio show began to read the top 5 times every Friday between football results and advertisements for soap. Someone painted on a wall, with no permission and perfect spelling, "Let the door be light." The complaint channel buzzed at first with old grievances. Then its cadence evened out to the dull and virtuous beat of maintenance. The inspectorate published weekly summaries in plain language, and Fatou made sure the summaries included the small praises that keep a workforce from bitterness, names of guards who shaved minutes, cooks who stretched rations without cheating nutritional dignity. The ban on brokerage did not require police to chase men in creased suits. It required their services to become embarrassing. In the alley where facilitation receipts had flourished, a new stall appeared that sold pencils and notebooks. The former broker greeted customers with the same courteous tone. He said he liked legitimate paper better. Madame Nadala did not lose her job. She was moved to a unit that cataloged lessons learned, under a supervisor who admired her efficiency but refused her old tempo of hardness. She attended the training with a posture that made chairs nervous and left with a softer stamp. The system did not humiliate her. It resequenced her duties to align with the new order of breath before billing. The reform spread where doors already existed. In the clinic at Ward 7, Golden Hour became a sister protocol. Treat first, verify later for urgent fevers. The school feeding program adjusted its distribution so that a late-arriving child could still find food without a mark against attendance. The registry office began a seat-first practice for elderly applicants. None of these moves required celebrity. They required a single idea repeated until it found wrists and ankles. Ibrahim visited one kitchen unannounced and stood in a shadow where he could watch the sequence without becoming it. A boy knocked. The guard opened. Bread crossed a short distance. The chalk squeaked 0047 on the board. He left as quietly as he came. Leadership felt in that moment like the pleasure of an oiled hinge. Prosecutions were light and targeted. One contractor who siphoned rice bags to a private canteen faced charges, and a trial watched by citizens who finally understood what the numbers were protecting. Most enforcement took the form of signed warnings and the loss of small privileges that office workers cling to. The monthly culture checks became almost boring. Staff read, repeated, practiced. The boredom was the point. In the boredom, the habit hardened. The ledgers now showed meals first and form second, and the sums still balanced. The meal wallet reconciled without midnight arithmetic. The door journal became a tradition passed between guards at shift change with the same care given to rifles and keys. The reform had not been a miracle. It had been a sequence corrected. The city had learned to breathe in the right order again, and the road forward no longer ran through weeds. By the time the rains decided to be generous again, the story had settled into the city's furniture. The lionhead knocker at the People's House had polished itself on the hands of petitioners and on the cloths of guards who had grown protective. Children invented a game called Minute Maker, where they practiced the knock open serve routine with bottle caps and chalk on the pavement. The public dashboards became part of the streetscape like bus timetables and football posters. Their numbers fluctuated within a narrow band that citizens considered normal. When a line spiked, someone always asked why. When it dipped, nobody threw a parade. Boredom wrapped the reform like a useful coat. Mariama found a place at a school that smelled of dust and possibility. The canteen portion was smaller than the hunger of the world, but large enough to carry learning across the morning. She kept the blue thread on her wrist, though the spoon no longer needed leash. She visited Aminata sometimes to return the tin with a joke. The cook would pretend to scold and then check the chalkboard as if numbers were grandchildren. Issa remained at the door, promoted by nobody, honored by the way people looked relieved when he appeared. He still wrote in the journal, the handwriting steady, the entries short. He trained new guards by holding a bowl and saying 3 words, breath, then ledger. Fatu kept the telegram channel honest. She posted weekly numbers without adjectives and added voice notes from kitchens that solved small problems with local ingenuity. When a vendor delivered beans mixed with stones, a video emerged of staff sorting swiftly while a replacement order was arranged. When an oven failed, a neighbor's bakery extended work hours and let the kitchen team use the back room. The complaint channel did not grow quiet. It matured. Reports spoke of a delayed plate here, an officious clerk there, a gate that tried to thicken. The inspectorate responded with the timing and tone of a reliable friend, rather than a late storm. Monthly culture checks took 30 minutes and a glass of water. Teams concluded with a line now so familiar, it no longer felt like doctrine. We treat first, we record it, and we show our numbers. Madame Ndala altered in increments. She suggested a new form, a shorter one, then surprised herself by withdrawing it when Aminata asked whether it would help breath or ledger. She learned to measure her day not by how many signatures she withheld, but by how many denials she converted into meals. Once she visited the kitchen on a quiet afternoon and stood by the door, watching a guard tie a shoelace for a child whose hands were full with bread. She touched the new dashboard without quite meaning to, the plastic warm under the sun. The number read Uero 39. Her stamp hand did not twitch. Ibrahim remained, as he had begun, a man with a desk that did not collect glass or gold. He kept the old notebook and added a new column for habits. He knew that policy is young the first month and mortal by the 3rd year unless tended. He asked Fatu to design culture walks, with no entourage, where small teams would visit doors and ask only one question. Where did the breath hitch this week? They collected answers like seeds and planted them quietly. He declined interviews that wanted to crown him. He asked instead that reporters film the chalkboard and talk to the guard. The story was not a miracle, but a maintenance manual. The city learned to export the idea without exporting the hero. A clinic in a neighboring town painted on its wall, Golden Hour. No wallet needed. A registrar in a far ward taped up a paper that read, Seat first. The phrases grew like proverbs that enter the language and have become proverb because they work. The hunger brokers branched into legal businesses with the strange pragmatism of cities that reassign their cleverness when the old game goes stale. The prayer and Friday sermons shifted from thunder to gratitude, the kind that thanks for good boredom. On some evenings, when the compound felt like a house again and not an institution, Ibrahim would walk the corridor that led to the lion-head door and run his palm along the wood. He remembered the first knock, not as a turning point, but as a test we passed for once. The door remained a door, an invitation and a responsibility. In the distance, a radio played a match. In the courtyard, a helper hosed the dust from the stones. In the kitchen, someone washed tins with a patience that felt like policy. The ledger lay open on a side table, the day's numbers plain and unashamed. He closed it gently, not to conceal but to rest the page. Tomorrow would knock again. The hinge would be ready. The breath would come before the bill. And the city, by repetition more than revelation, would go on shocking the world not with spectacle, but with the quiet scandal of doing things in the right order. As the credits settle and the last notes fade, thank you for lending your time, your attention, and your conscience. These stories move because you carry them onward, to your kitchens and classrooms, your group chats and neighborhood corners, where change is kept alive by ordinary hands. If this one stayed with you, leave us a thought below so others can learn from it and help the next viewer find their way to the door. And if you liked the video, then like, share, comment, and subscribe.